has gained significant attention over the past few decades and continues to require a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach in making sure that we have substantial progress towards the vision for clean energy transition and universal energy access. Most importantly, economic and financial strategies play a critical role in addressing the gaping energy deficit and scaling solar energy globally. These strategies take the form of policies and regulations that govern ownership rights, business models, financing schemes, and operating structures, which ultimately drive or deter investments in this sector. Advancing in the fight against energy poverty and facilitating the transition to clean energy can only happen if the underlying policy and regulatory frameworks are designed to facilitate the integration of clean energy. ISA's research shows that substantial progress in clean energy transitions in various countries are often driven by a combination of regulatory, policy, and finance mechanisms that accelerate development in this regard and eventually enable its scale-up. However, the discourse and questions continue to revolve around what are the most efficient ways that policymakers and regulators can customize their regulatory environment to address local challenges and scale solar adoption. At the ISA, we work together with our member countries to build capacity for regulators and policymakers to answer some of these questions and drive evidence-based decisions that suit their local characteristics. Today, we have this very illustrious panel to discuss and evaluate the various policy measures and financing strategies for tackling energy poverty globally. The panel will delve into the various policies and instruments that are crucial for financing clean energy investments and enabling supporting frameworks for clean energy transition. So I welcome all of you to this panel, and I'll leave it to the moderator to take this discussion forward. Thank you all for listening.
Let's put our hands together for her, please, everyone. As you all know by now, I have ample time and I wait before I start. I need to hear the applause, ladies and gentlemen. I need to make sure that you're ready for the session. Thank you, appreciate this. Now it's time to invite our moderator and our panelists to join us here on stage. Please put your hands together for Ankita Mukherjee, former news anchor and producer, who will be moderating this session. Joining us as panelists for the discussion will be MS Ahluwalia, Distinguished Fellow CESP, John Crates, CEO RMI, ladies and gentlemen. Subodh Maisalkar, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, who will be joining us virtually. And we have Erik Solheim, former Minister of Climate and the Environment of Norway. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a distinguished panel here with us. Let's give them a warm reception as I hand over the stage to our session moderator, Ankita, to kindly take the conversation forward. Yes, she. Yeah, Subodh is here with us. There he is on the screen. Yes.
Right, thank you all for being here, and can I just say it's an absolute honor for me to be speaking with this very distinguished panel. We have global thought leaders on energy transitions and climate change, and we're going to get sort of perspectives on how an integrated approach can really accelerate the solar transition, where we'll talk about economy, finance, policy frameworks, technology as well, and the intersection of all of those in accelerating this change. And we have, as I said, absolute experts in the field. All day we've heard a lot of discussions on just how far solar has already progressed, the fact that it's the world's fastest growing electricity source now for almost 2 decades. India has recently surpassed Japan to become the world's third largest solar manufacturer, and it's generated close to 6% of its energy needs in the last year. Dr. Monty Singh Ahluwalia, if I can begin with you. You touch upon some of the important economic and policy strategies for scaling up renewable projects further. In a paper you've recently written, medium-term strategies for transitioning to net zero by 2070. But you're also a skeptic to some extent. Where do you see the major barriers right now in this next leap in the solar journey?
Well, I mean, as you say, we have very ambitious targets, which is good. At least now we're not stuck in that old mode of saying, no, we can't do it. Climate justice requires that we don't make a transition. Our official position is that we're going to get to net zero by 2070. That's a big change from what our position was, let us say, 10 years ago. Now the next question is, are we doing something about it? And the answer is yes. We've laid down some targets for 2030, and I think in earlier sessions you've heard people talk about them, and I don't want to go into numbers. But you shouldn't be surprised if you have an ambitious target that there are going to be problems. It's not a simple thing. Now the most important thing about the transition is, will the technology actually make it cost effective? Now, if technology was such that renewable energy today was totally cost effective, you don't have to do anything. I mean, the market would do it anyway. Nobody in his right mind would set up a fossil fuel based plant if you can get the same electricity cheaper. And the truth is that while the alternative technologies have now become much, much cheaper than they were, they're not necessarily yet cheaper than the conventional one, okay? Primarily because supply is intermittent. I mean, the sun only shines for 8 hours a day, and you need electricity throughout. So in that case, there are technologies that will take care of that. You can mix it up with wind, which sort of helps, and most of all, batteries. And particularly what's going on around the world in battery technology, there is a great hope that costs of batteries will come down. I mean, one of the panelists is more knowledgeable on this than I am, and perhaps he'd like to spell that out. But from what I understand is that with battery costs what they are today, the switch to a steady supply is still going to be more expensive. So we're trying to push it by imposing quantitative limits on how much renewable energy you have to buy if you're a discom or if you're a large consumer. I mean, there are other ways of doing that, like imposing a carbon tax, which, if you ask any economist, they would say that's the right thing to do, but nowhere in the world is anyone doing it, because people don't like imposing taxes that will raise prices. Now, if you force somebody to adopt a more expensive route, you may not be putting an explicit tax, but it is going to end up raising prices at some stage. So absorbing those prices is one big challenge. And I think that's a huge problem. Another, and I'll stop after this, we can come back to it. I think if you're going to move from a steady supply to a much more variable supply, then the way the electricity market works needs to be totally revolutionized. I mean, we need much greater variation in time of day tariffs. If you're relying a lot on solar energy, then during peak solar production times, the price of energy, price of electricity should be much lower. And when you're relying on solar plus battery, it should be higher. We have not yet made that transition. And I think we need to recognize that this is not just a central government issue, because this is a regulatory thing that will be decided by each state electricity regulatory corporation. So it's quite possible that across the country, you will have different practices, some allowing more variability, others not. In a way, I think it will become an experiment. And the states that get it right, or the states that get most of it right, will be seen to do better, and hopefully someone in the system will learn from that. But I'll stop at that. We can come back.
Okay, of course, India has its sort of specific commitments, but no country acts in a silo. And Dr. Jankreitz, if I can get you in, where do you see intermittency as a problem, and indeed battery costs. Do you think that's something that's already being addressed? And do you see that as a barrier?
Yeah, I think it's been well noted that we're in a mode right now where these technologies are moving at exponential rates. They're moving at exponential rates in deployment when we think about how fast they're growing globally, and they're also moving in costs very quickly down. And so by our analysis, by the IEA's analysis, we see another 25 to 50% reduction in solar costs, for instance, by the end of this decade as being very possible. And that's leading to large-scale deployment that continuously is growing the market. When we think about firm capacity, which Dr. Singh was mentioning, there are different ways for us to run the grid, and new business models and market models are absolutely required. But in an ideal case, when we think about the intermittency of solar, it wouldn't just be batteries. It would also be demand response. It would be, kind of coupling it with ways of pre-cooling buildings and things like that allow you to get to a low-cost, flexible system that acts more like a virtual power plant if you can draw all these different resources in. But when you think about batteries as being a solution that everyone looks at and says, yes, we can deploy solar alongside batteries, batteries are enjoying not just a massive cost decline, but they're moving even faster than solar right now. And over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen lithium-ion batteries, as they've transitioned from different chemistry cycles, to drop almost 50% in cost by the leaders in the market. And that's getting to the point where we're starting to see the ability of combined portfolios of solar and wind and storage to compete directly with firm capacity for fossil fuels. And that's playing out here in India with some of the round-the-clock auctions that have been submitted. So we're right at the cusp right now in a very fast-moving market of being able to provide an exact, kind of substitute for existing fossil fuels, and that's only going to get better over time. So expect that, kind of within the next 3, 4, 5 years, there are going to be very viable solutions. Right now, it takes some engineering, and it happens at large grid scale, but not yet at small local scale that you can get to those cost points.
Right. I'd like to bring Professor Maisalkar in on this as well, because a lot of your work, Professor Maisalkar, has actually dealt with this at the Energy Research Institute at Nanyang Technological University. So, if you would like to talk about whether the cost of batteries is still something that really needs to be factored in, whether we've sort of moved beyond that debate, where you see current barriers existing, and perhaps the steps that are being done now to address those.
Thank you so much. Before I begin, I just want to do a quick sound check. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, absolutely. Please carry on.
So I think Dr. Singh and also other speakers have highlighted that there are many battery innovations which are ongoing. I think currently what we see in the market are lithium-ion batteries with a variety of new chemistries. What is coming down the pike are different new innovations in battery technologies. To answer your question first, as of today, battery is definitely still a cost adder and always will be a cost adder to the levelized cost of electricity. But the cost adder on the batteries would come down with innovations in battery technologies. So firstly, beyond the innovations in lithium-ion, you would see new battery technologies such as solid-state batteries, which would be coming down. Redox flow batteries are already being considered. That would be a low-cost option. In the longer term, we would look at replacing lithium with sodium-ion batteries. And really, even in the longer term beyond that, and this may take 3 or 4 decades, we are really looking at the possibility of sodium-ion batteries. And at that point, the cost adder from a battery cost perspective will go down tremendously. But we also have to remember that batteries is not the only energy storage. As Dr. Singh also mentioned, it's really important to have a basket of renewable technologies that would balance solar with perhaps with wind or hydropower and so on. But from an energy storage perspective, we should also consider hydrogen as a buffer from an intermittency perspective. So the good news is the battery technologies are definitely marching towards reducing cost and greater availability, but there are other technologies which would also come in the mix so that we have multiple options to consider.
Right. Eric Solheim, if you'd like to sort of come in on that, and how, I'd also like you to bear on how financial and policy frameworks can support, looking at a basket of renewables rather than just solar.
Absolutely, but first of all, I'm so happy to be back at the International Solar Alliance. I came for the inauguration meeting here in Delhi with Prime Minister Modi and President Macron and a lot of other global leaders. I'm so happy to see the progress which has happened in the meantime. And also very happy to see India moving to now the third, but very soon I'm sure India will be the second major solar nation in the world, behind China, but massive. In the desert, we should give applause for that, absolutely. I mean, in the desert of Gujarat, I was there quite recently. Adani Group is setting up what will be the biggest singular solar and wind combined facility in the world. Because Adani may be an environmentalist, but at his core, he's a business person. He thinks this can be profitable, and it's enormous. Just a comparison, that one plant is 6 times the entire energy grid in Nigeria. And Nigeria is the biggest nation in Africa. That one plant is the same as all hydropower produced in the Kingdom of Norway. And we are 100% served by hydro in our electricity grid. So it's huge, huge, huge. Then I will focus on the politics, because when with Montek, of course, how can I focus on the economy? He knows that so much better. But let me point to 3 main obstacles to overcome to make solar the prime energy in the world. Number 1, government regulations. They must speed up. Permits must come much faster. If it doesn't speed up, everything will be bureaucratic and slow. It sometimes now takes much, much longer to get the permission to set up offshore wind or solar than it takes to actually establish the plant. And in the context of India, Gujarat now seems to be the clear lead state, and that is because people trust the governance of Gujarat. They think it's efficient. That's why people like Adani or Reliance or others want to invest in that state, and other states in India should look to Gujarat to see how they can also make the system less red tape, much more efficient. That's number 1. It's not just an Indian issue, it's as much a European or American issue. Secondly, we must make solar people-centered, not technology-centered. Look, 2 months back I was in Urumqi in China. That's the biggest solar plant in the world, 4 gigawatt. Well, it's not small and cozy. It's like the ocean. You see solar panels to the horizon. It's not easy to get acceptance for such a solar plant in anyone's backyard. For that to happen, you need a profound dialogue with the local people, and you need to make sure that some of the windfalls of the project is remaining with the local people. Otherwise, people will oppose. They will tell you, well, this is fine for the world, it's fine for India, that is not fine for me, and then and my family, and then I will not accept. So let's make sure we make solar industry people-centered. One way is to combine with agriculture, to look into how solar panels can be in the agriculture fields. That will give the farmer a double income from agriculture and from the energy. And the third, which may be more difficult to talk about, but that is every nation is facing the same issue. They need to cooperate with and compete with China all the same. China is not so far ahead of anyone else. China is 60% of everything in the green space: solar, wind, hydro, electric batteries, electric cars, metros, high-speed rail, whatever you point to. China is at least 60%. In the solar, it may be 80 or 90%. So if you want to go fast, you need to find a way of cooperating with China, but of course also competing with China because India wants jobs in India. Make it in India, as the Prime Minister says. But that balance is not easy to find. If we cannot find that balance, it will be much slower because China is in a division by its own at this historical juncture.
Right. Well, lots to unpack there, and I'm going to seize upon the last point and take that across to Dr. Ahluwalia. You know, we've already seen in China solar industry kind of excess capacity driving prices to this to record new lows. So do you see this as a crisis or an opportunity? And then of course, you know, with the heavy concentration of solar manufacturing in China, is that then a challenge for the rest of the world? What about sort of distribution, as it were?
Well, I mean, my own view is that, look, if the product is something that there's a demand for in the world, and if somebody is setting up excess capacity and driving the price down, that is something that the rest of the world should be welcoming. Okay? Now, in our case, the issue really will be, and this will be raised and has been raised, that look, we intend to have a huge solar industry in India. That's an opportunity to do some domestic production. To what extent should we rely on imports, and to what extent should we become completely sort of Atmanirbhar, as it were? And that there's a conflict there. I mean, at the moment, for example, the government, I think this is the latest position, I mean, the government has approved, if you want to set up a solar plant which is going to be integrated into the grid, so it's selling either to large industries or to the discoms, then you're only eligible to enter that market if you buy your panels or whatever modems from a list of approved manufacturers. And that's not such a huge problem because the real issue is where to get the photovoltaic cells from. And that's where China has a huge excess capacity, and they've driven global prices down to about half of what they are in India, right? I think there's thought being given, but I believe that has not yet been notified, whether they want to have a similar approved list of domestic manufacturers even for the panel, for the solar PV cells. Now, if we were to do that, then basically we cannot really rely on the fact that they're available now internationally at very low prices. If we don't do that, then you have to pay a duty, and the duty is 25%. So you've got a situation where, at the moment, if you buy domestically, it'll be 100% above world prices. If you're allowed to import, which at the moment you are, it's only 25%. So do you go from 25% to 100? That's a big choice. Now, frankly, in my own view, it would be odd to give up the benefit of very low cost supply of a product. Our main purpose is to have electricity. I mean, if our main purpose was to produce modules, that's a different strategy. And I don't think that modules are quite, I mean, modules or other PV cells, they're not the same thing as, you know, memory chips and logic chips and so on. Because those things can enable the person, anyone who can access them from outside, could control the whole system. So you would not want anyone to be able to control, let's say, your electricity grid or your banking transactions or any of these kinds of things, okay? But if it's just a cell, well, I mean, it's a choice. My guess would be that if it's available around the world, whatever we do to promote domestic manufacture should be made competitive. I mean, we've heard that, for example, battery cells, technologies are going to change, costs are going to be driven down. Do we get locked into the same problem? That is, we're only going to use the batteries that we produce ourselves in a world in which the rest of the world is having a huge decline in battery costs. So personally, I think that on the energies, because energy is important, we should have a very clear sense that, yeah, we're willing to pay a little bit more for some self-sufficiency, but not create a completely blocked market where whoever's sitting domestically, whatever they're producing, they can sell. Unless they're subjected to competition from abroad, we will simply miss the so-called technology revolution that everybody's talking about. Look, even in PVs, at the moment, for example, the conversion of solar electricity to electricity is about 21%, some a little bit higher. And people are talking that it could go above 30. So now if you set up a whole bunch of module PV producing units that just produce at this level of efficiency, and if the rest of the world changes to 30%, then you have a choice. I mean, you know, are you going to be locked in to this whole technology? It would be a disaster if we were.
Dr. Kretz, I wonder whether you have a contrary opinion to that at all, or a view, but also it's not just manufacturing, is it? I mean, China is also the major supplier of critical materials for solar, and you know, how important then is the diversification of solar supply chains?
Yeah, well, this is an important issue to consider, and I would separate, when we think about clean energy technologies, solar from storage for sure, because batteries have a whole different strategy around them. But I do look at solar as very much a commodity product that produces one thing. It produces electrons in the end, and those electrons are universally usable. And so the idea of having very low-cost solar is a good thing for any economy, and we should be welcoming, you know, provided that's produced in the right way and consistent. We should be welcoming everybody having low options for the lowest cost producer of electrons possible. And I think you can build then on top of that lots of value. And economies like India, economies all around the world should be focused on where is the value created on top of very cheap electricity. Whether it be in green hydrogen molecules, whether it be in advanced cooling technologies, whether it be in the ability to process data and house large data centers, that's a structural advantage that we deny ourselves when we don't go for the lowest cost solution there. Storage is different, again, because of some of the critical mineral elements of it. The nice thing about critical minerals is once you get them into the economy once, you can recycle them if you've got the midstream capacity. And that's where countries that want energy security here going forward and want to be able to embrace that should be focused on having the midstream recycling capacity to buy those materials once and to keep cycling them through so that they then in effect do have national security interests managed. There are not only different technologies with batteries, though, there are also different uses with batteries. And we're just going to see a proliferation of that market and constant innovation. And I think there are lots of reasons that, especially countries like India, should have a footprint in batteries and be in that technology race constantly, because it's going to continue to produce insights and value across many different sectors going forward.
Eric Solheim.
First of all, it's very important to understand that most of the jobs are not coming from making the panels. I mean, these panel making facilities in China are not job intensive. They are very highly automatic, basically run by robots, not creating a lot of jobs. All the jobs, or most of the jobs, will come in other parts of the solar industry, as you say, building upon the panels, implementing the panels, putting the panels up, connecting to the grid. All these things, it can only be done locally and creating a huge amount of jobs. But it will happen much faster if the panels as such are cheap. But again, of course, looking into how gradually India can take more of the jobs from this is completely logical and right. But one way may be to partner with China, form joint venture with China, invite Chinese companies to invest. That's at least what I think Europe should do, not just in the solar area, but when it comes to electric vehicles, electric batteries. At these days, there is absolutely no way Europe can compete with China on electric batteries. The two main electric car battery factories, CATL and BYD, both Chinese, are far ahead. There's nothing in Europe, anything close to what CATL or BYD is doing. So it's completely logical for Europe to invite CATL and BYD to invest in Europe, joint ventures with European companies, create jobs in Europe, and bring the technology to Europe. And look, mind you, this is exactly how China developed its own nation. They invited American, European companies to come there, to co-invest, to share the technology. Sometimes the Chinese stole that technology, all that is true, but it was enormously beneficial for China. China invited Tesla to make up a huge factory in Shanghai, and the main purpose was to create what they called a catfish, a strong fish which will make sure there's a lot of competition in the electric car industry in China, and now BYD may be bigger than Tesla, and for sure there will be a number of other Chinese companies competing with Tesla. So, but there is no easy solution to these issues, but they are core to the rapid implementation of all the renewable technologies.
Yes. Professor Maisarkar, solar investments are clearly flowing to China, to India to some extent, to the developed nations also to an extent. But, what about the rest of the world, and does that create tech barriers in a way?
Sure, but before I answer your question, if you don't mind, I'll just weigh in on the previous
Yes,
discussion.
Absolutely.
I think it's definitely true in terms of the battery technologies and so on that China has a lead. But if you go back 15 or 20 years, it wasn't so. So China has built up that capability just in the last 15 years. And one of the key factors that has made that happen is really the effort from the government behind in terms of supporting the growth of the battery technologies. And I think that is something that is a lesson for us all to learn in terms of scaling. How do you scale rapidly? How do you scale to that effect within a decade? To answer your question, I think the solar technology is definitely, from a global perspective, it is advancing very fast. So beyond what we have today, similar to the battery technologies, there are several different solar technologies which are being worked on. And these include new types of cells based on silicon, new types of tandem solar cells. And these new tandem solar cells definitely have the promise of going beyond 30%. In terms of conversion of sunlight to electricity. We also have to remember that in addition to energy storage, there is a whole other technological support that is needed for solar to flourish. And that includes things like smart grids, that includes power electronics, that includes AI and other technologies. So it's not just solar which is singularly going to be the spearhead going forward. It is solar supported by a plethora of technologies around it, which is essential for all of us to invest in.
Well, my question also was on investments, and if Dr. Kretz, you want to take this up, how do we regulate the direction and flow of investments into the sector? Is there, ought there to be a global solar financing facility perhaps that would sort of look at things on a macro level, on a global level?
Yeah, I think when it comes to investments, we have to separate markets that are moving and where solar is well understood and able to be used versus those where it's a frontier technology and hasn't been. Right? Because OECD, China, and even India to a certain extent, especially around utility scale solar, these are markets that already allocate capital and where investments are straightforward. But there are lots of places where investments aren't straightforward, where there isn't a track record, where the risks are misperceived and not properly quantified. And in those markets, it's absolutely critical to do some work, right? Where nonprofits like RMI, like ISA, need to step in and help incubate and create the track record within the market that actually signals what the right risk level is associated with it. We at RMI think a lot about the need the issue isn't about capital, it's about project pipeline and having de-risked project pipelines that then capital can flow into with a known return and understanding for it. And so increasingly when we think about many markets across the global south, when we think about even areas like rooftop solar here in India, you need to have kind of project pipelines that start to build out and make the category investable where it wasn't previously. And that then de-risks and supports the larger scale unlocking that gets the private capital in the long run. So initially, typically it will be project preparation, technical assistance, followed by some blended capital or philanthropic capital that gets the first few projects together. That then sets the pace and the ability to scale. And that's something that ISA has created facilities for, that RMI has worked specifically to try to create, because that's how markets start, and once they get started, then the private capital can come in and start scaling and using all that production capacity that we have more effectively.
I think the point of this session was to have actionable insight on how to do that exactly. So, Mr. Solheim, if you'd like to weigh in.
I mean, if I had 1 crore rupees, would I invest in solar in Vietnam, or would I invest in the Central African Republic? I mean, there's just one answer to that question. Everyone, of course, would invest in Vietnam. No one would invest in Chad or the Central African Republic. Because in those nations, there is what investors will consider a very significant country risk linked to currency, linked to political developments, and a lot more. So how to square this? In principle, all investments should be private sector. Only private sector has the technology, the leverage, the size to do it. But when there is a significant country risk, then the development budgets of the rich nations and the money of the World Bank and similar banks should be used to leverage that risk, so that the investor who is ready to invest in Burkina Faso or Mali or Chad, which have enormous potential for solar, that risk is taken by the development budget, while the private sector is doing their job. When it comes to investment in, say, Vietnam, in all likelihood there is no need for any state component. It can just be done by the market. And just one last comment. Battery is absolutely critical. But now, I will ask Montec to take a look at the last bid in Gujarat. It was a combined solar and battery thing, and it brought down the price to an absolute record low level. So I think solar with battery is now competitive with coal and oil 100%. Added, India has a huge advantage also because it's a hilly place. There are very few plains in India, which means that basically everywhere the potential for hydro and for pump storage is there. The central part of China is completely flat. You cannot do any pump storage in central China. Yes, in the outskirts of China, but not in the center of China. But there's no such plain in India. Every state here, and there are now huge plans for pump storage in Tamil Nadu, in Andhra Pradesh, in Maharashtra, and many other states, and that will also provide a very good battery.
So you see huge potential in India.
Absolutely huge.
Dr. Aduvalio, any thoughts?
No, I agree with that. Look, people keep talking about there's an affection for coal because we have a lot of coal. But we have a lot of sunshine also. So there's no question that the potential's there.
Yeah.
You just need to make sure that the little things that are preventing an optimal response are properly taken care of.
But to go back to the point that you, Mr. Solheim, made about communities and involving communities, the moment you're talking about vast tracts of land, and it's also really about sort of addressing energy poverty issues as well, how best do we go forward sort of in terms of involving communities directly, women, underserved communities especially, and where have you seen the barriers so far in that?
I would offer an advice from my own nation, Norway, where we got everything wrong on this particular measure. When I was in the government, we thought that employing wind energy in Norway was just a technical thing. It was just a way of getting the finance system right, and we will get a lot. Then people rose up and said, we don't want wind energy in our community. Why was that? Because they said, oh, this is good for the planet, this is good for Norway, but it's not good for me, not good for my family. We get nothing here, no jobs, no prosperity, no nothing for us, except we have these ugly windmills as people will conceive them. So how to resolve this? 2 points. One, there must be a lot more of a dialogue, whether that's indigenous groups, as in some parts of the world, or local communities. There must be a dialogue, they must be invited into the room for the discussion, otherwise it cannot work. And secondly, there must be a financial, economic benefit for the local people. In the past, hydropower was immensely popular back home in Norway. Why? Because we had the concept of hydropower municipality, and that was a municipality with more money for the child care, for the elderly, for the swimming pools, for the roads, for everything. Simply a more affluent community because of the hydropower. If we can have the similar concept, a solar or wind community is more affluent, then of course it will be a much easier sell to the local people.
What about jobs though, Montek Singh Ahluwalia? You know, the other key factor in the solar transformation is going to be so much reskilling needed in solar jobs, and also to replace all the jobs that will be lost in fossil fuel and related industries.
No, and look, any structural change involves a loss of old type jobs and a creation of new jobs. And this is going to take place over a long period of time. So the fact that you have to skill yourself in order to be ready for the new job, that's not a problem. Because whatever you're looking at, the whole skilling thing has to be built into the kind of change you want. I think it's true that probably if you just look at energy itself and the cost of maintenance and running the system, the shift from capital-intensive coal-based power to a more decentralized renewable power system will actually generate more and better quality jobs in the sector itself. It's true that it won't be in the same regions, because you know, if all the coal is in 2 or 3 states, whereas the sunshine is falling all over, there will be some change. And I think you need to address that. Again, interstate dialogue, maybe some special compensation. That's not difficult once you've decided that you're going to do it.
Right. I think, you know, let's start taking final words from everybody, because I believe we do have to wrap up this session. Professor Maisaika, let me begin with you. Do you sort of feel optimistic at this point that, you know, we could be, in the words of Charles Dickens, in the worst and best of times? The worst because, you know, it's quite obvious that the world is not on track yet to meet the global warming target. Far stronger action is needed. But do you also feel optimistic that, you know, stronger climate solutions are at hand, particularly in solar?
Absolutely, Ankita. I mean, you're absolutely right that we are on track of not meeting the 1.5 degree target. But if you look around history, you know, there are so many places where we have reversed the effect of poor climate. For example, in the West, I think the pollution was rampant until the mid 1950s. If you are a regular visitor to China, you'll see over the last 10 years, the pollution in the cities have been tackled. And it's the same experience here in Singapore. The rivers in Singapore used to be full of sewage late as the late 1990s. So over the last several decades, there are many positive examples of things really being cleared up just by deploying solutions that make sense. And speaking about solar, as we all know, solar is on the verge of a 50x increase in deployment between now and 2050. And there are so many estimates that have been made that all you need is somewhere between 1 to 2% land devoted to solar as well as wind to supply most of the primary energy needs today. So with all the other advances, not just in solar but peripheral to solar, I think I'm very optimistic that although we may miss the 1.5 degree target, I think we can recover and reverse a number of effects of climate change.
Dr. Prates, your last thoughts and what you've just heard.
Yeah, I fully agree that while we are hitting scary tipping points from an environmental perspective, we're absolutely hitting positive tipping points from an economic perspective right now. And that some of the S-curve growth, the exponential growth that we're seeing in solutions does give me a lot of hope right now that we have the tools available at the scale required to respond. But we do need our us, our human systems, to be ready to change and adapt quickly and use those tools to deploy and figure out some of the community, the engagement practices that are ultimately going to be the real limiters to how quickly we can go.
In 2009, the world met in Copenhagen for what was seen as the ultimate climate conference. It was a complete disaster on the diplomatic level. But what I think not one single individual in the room considered was that after that conference, the price of solar energy would fall by 90%, and the price of wind energy by maybe 85%. That, of course, is a complete game changer. Because if it's a huge cost going solar, it will be very hard. When you can save money going solar in combination with batteries and with pump storage as a battery, well, then it will happen very fast. And I believe we are at that critical point now. All our history developments are slow until they reach the critical mass, and then they go very fast. And we see that's the point we are at now. So there is every reason to be optimistic, but of course not underestimate the difficulties.
Right. And of course, as I was saying earlier, no country exists in isolation. So how do we bring about those global collaborations then to make sure that this space continues?
Well, that's a really huge task that you've suddenly thrown in the last half a minute. No, I think, look, I share the view that there's a lot of ground for optimism. And I mean, we will have problems, but we need to watch. Most of all, each of us need to learn from the rest of the world is doing. But getting the world to cooperate, that is a completely separate issue. And frankly, we can only assume that the collective wisdom of the world will somehow make collaboration possible. Because if it doesn't, then there's too much bad news around. So we should just assume that that will happen. I can't tell. I think there's nothing that India can do that will make the world more likely to contribute, except to demonstrate that, look, we're serious about what we committed. And until very recently, a lot of people were questioning that, are we actually going to do what we committed? So frankly, if we can demonstrate that we are on the path ourselves, that gives us the credibility to say to the world, what are you guys doing? And the honest truth is they're not doing enough. There's no doubt about that.
Well, all right. On that note, I'm going to open this up for questions. Just one or two very quick questions, if we can. Yes, the gentleman in blue.
Actually, as Mr. Eric mentioned that we had seen a 4 gigawatt plant in China. So, are we thinking about the e-disposable management as well? Because I think 4 gigawatt will something be around 67 lakh solar panels. So this would be and as we are moving forward in India, China and all other countries.
So your question is on e-disposable management, right? If we could, right, okay, I believe we have time for exactly this question. So Mr. Salam, if you'd like to respond quickly.
It's an excellent question, and this 4 gigawatt, that's now. Just in October it will be 8 gigawatt. Next year it will be 20 gigawatt. It's absolutely enormous, because this can basically only happen in deserts. In Gujarat, Adani is very lucky, because it's not just a desert, it's a salty desert. There's nothing, absolutely nothing there. Not a straw, not a human, not a camel, no nothing. So it's a perfect place for solar. But your issue, how to recycle. That thinking must start now. You cannot wait, because there will be any number of solar panels to recycle, any number of wind blades to recycle. The good news is that at least the Chinese have started putting quite a lot of interest into this to try to develop the solutions. But I think it's a very good issue for the International Solar Alliance also to promote this internationally, because otherwise it will be an enormous waste, an enormous waste problem. If you can turn them into new panels, it will be a fantastic opportunity for the future. So Ajay, please take up this issue and see how we can promote it.
Because coming forward also, we are as moving into the batteries also. Batteries also will have a certain waste. We need to think about that also, because as a future perspective, it will also create a...
Right. Yes, we take your point about recycling, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are completely out of time at this point, so I'd like to thank all the panelists very much indeed for this very engaging and wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much. And can we hear it for our moderator? Can I get a little volume on my mic? Thank you. Can I please request Anya Iazoba to kindly help us do the honors, present a memento to everyone on the dais, please. And ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge round of applause to everyone, whether present physically or virtually, who are a part of this session. Thank you to our moderator for driving the conversation. And thank you, of course, both for joining us here virtually. We can't give you a memento physically, but yes, we really appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings us to the end of this session.